Welcome, everybody. I am Dr. Rebecca Troy, owner and founder of Retrain the Dyslexic Brain, and we are so thrilled to have you here for one of our graduate case study reviews. So if this us, I would invite you to come back. So we do one of these every other week. And there are several reasons that we do this, but part of it is to just help inspire you about what is possible as it pertains to dyslexia. So as you can imagine, there are lots of rumors and disbeliefs about what is possible as it pertains to dyslexia. And so we want to help you to see what is truly possible. There we go. So today's case, we are going to be talking about Frederick, an 8-year-old who went through our program. And Frederick was one of the roughest cases that we have seen in terms of his phonological awareness. So as you probably know, dyslexia occurs on a continuum, anywhere from it's really not that bad to like, wow, my brain is really, really struggling connecting letters and sounds. And Frederick was one of those children. And so when he started, he was only 33% accurate in his ability to even hear and manipulate sounds in words, which massively shifted to being 83% accurate by the time he finished the program. His scores on the Wide Range Achievement Test 5 in reading went from the 9th percentile to the 61st percentile. His scores in spelling went from the 12th percentile to the 50th. Phonetically, he was able to spell at the 80th percentile, which we'll talk about all of this. But more importantly, I think, yes, it's important to talk about the data, but I really want you to see what this looks like in a human life. And so we're going to tell his story from his parents, what it was like for him. But Dad said he's very much into engineering, and I'm pretty excited to see what he does with that. It's a field that you need to be able to read, and he wasn't going to be able to do that unless he could read. And now all of that is possible. So just super enormous shifts in life and all of those things. So if you've never met us before, we are a corporation that helps to give neuroscience to families. And so there is absolutely a way to help the brain to change how it's functioning. And we'll talk about this in just a minute, but absolutely, the brain is a dynamic organ that has the capacity to change over time. And so it really matters what you do with it in order to get things to light up that haven't been active before. So when we do this, we're actually giving these strategies to families so that they can do that in their homes for 10 to 15 minutes a day. So everything that I'm about to share with you is something that Patricia did in her home with Frederick, with our coaching and support. So why are we doing this? Like, why do we do these case studies? So number one, we want to do this to help dispel myths and misconceptions about dyslexia, because unfortunately people are still out there saying there's absolutely nothing that can be done. We really can't change this. You just have to deal with it. And this is going to be something that you struggle with forever. Maybe you can find some workarounds or some accommodations, but that's simply just not true. And so we're going to help you to see why that's not true today. Hopefully we have you leave inspired and with possibility and hope. So Frederick's case was really severe. And through his story today, I hope that you can see that neurological change is absolutely possible, even with his mother, who has no background in neuroscience, doing the program with him. So I hope that you leave with that new sense of possibility. I also want to teach you a little bit about the dyslexic brain and how it works, and then to connect you to a real human that has gone through the Retrain the Dyslexic Brain program and what that impact has looked like. So before we get going, I do want you to have a deep understanding of dyslexia. So as a parent of a child who is struggling, I think it's really important that you understand what is actually going on in your child's brain, and more specifically, what's not going on. So you can see on this image, this is an fMRI of two individuals. So the person on the left is a non-dyslexic person, and the person on the right has dyslexia. And this image is taken during a language task. So I think it's important to have this distinction that when we're not doing a language task, there really isn't a difference in how the brain is functioning. It's not like a person with dyslexia doesn't have activity. In fact, most people with dyslexia have average or above average intelligence. It's just that when asked to do a language task, like, hey, spell this word or read this paragraph, or even sometimes remember this list of things, there is a difference in how the brain functions. So you can see here in the non-dyslexic person, there is activity in the back of the brain here that we call the occipital lobe, and that is where vision is processed within the brain. And then there's also significant activity here in the parietal temporal lobes where we process sound. And so quite literally, there is activity between what you see and what you hear in the brain. Now, when we go over and compare that to a person with dyslexia, you'll see that there's not activity here. This area is underdeveloped for language. And also in the parietal temporal lobes, we have far less activity here. So what that means is that if a person with dyslexia were to see the word cat in front of their eyes, the brain takes in that information, and because there isn't activity there, it doesn't know what to do with it. So we might add letters in that don't belong. We might omit letters that are supposed to be there. We might try to decode a word and maybe get the first couple of letters correct, and everything else after that is a guess. We might struggle with little words like the and of, things that you might think, my child should know how to do this. And it's because their brain just does not have activity there for language. And so I think it's important and an important distinction to recognize that this is not effort. It is not because they're not trying, it is because their brain literally does not have activity there. So here's another image of the same thing, but with an EEG, or excuse me, yes, an EEG. So you'll see in the typical reader, we have activity here in these areas that I just mentioned. In the reader with dyslexia, we do not. But when you teach the brain to connect letters and sounds, and you do that through the power of neuroplasticity and repetition and consistency, you absolutely can change how the brain is functioning for language. And you'll see that in this image, it's actually overcompensating, and we have even more areas of the brain that are being used. But the most important part is that they're using the same parts of the brain that a typical reader would have, which causes them to be able to read and to spell like their peers, which is critical and life-changing. So I want to tell you the story of Frederick, and this was information that we gathered from his parents, Roger and Patricia. You can listen directly to their interview. It's over on YouTube. If you want to, you can just type in Frederick and you can listen to Frederick's story directly from them. But basically, when he started the program with us, he could not read at all. And so Patricia said, we initially attributed a lot of his struggles to COVID delays. So not unlike many of you, like Frederick was in preschool at the time that COVID started. And so he missed a lot of that in-person learning, and he missed some of the introduction into letters and sounds. And so initially Patricia thought, well, that's what's going on here. He just missed some of that. So we just got to catch him up. But by mid first grade, she knew that something much more serious was going on. So they had weekly spelling tests, and he would get those returned with 50% of it incorrect, 70% of it incorrect. And that was obviously very, very demoralizing for him, and he felt very bad about that. And Patricia said, as parents, we were absolutely baffled because we'd read to him consistently since infancy. So they are professors and they are highly literate individuals. They read really complex text to him as a little person, like, I think she said The Trumpet and the Swan, and he was comprehending that and following along and loving the stories. And so not knowing how dyslexia works, she thought, well, surely we're setting him up for literacy success. But he just absolutely could not connect letters and sounds where they realized like something else is going on here, which caused them to realize that they were dealing with potential dyslexia. So Roger did share kind of an emotional moment for him that was really poignant in this journey for them to say, we absolutely have to dig in and do something about this. And so they were at a parade. It was in the summertime. They were throwing candy off of the floats and they were throwing out Sour Patch Kids. And Frederick was very, very interested in searching around specifically for that candy. And so his father said, like, well, what's the deal with Sour Patch Kids? And he said, oh, well, Sour Patch Kids are what the kids get on the top of their spelling test when they get them right. And so his dad said, well, did you ever get one of those? And he said, no, those aren't for me. I don't get those kind of things. And so it was in that moment that Roger realized that Frederick was already internalizing that he was from a different class than his peers. Like, that's them, they get those things, but me, I don't get those things. And so he had already begun comparing himself negatively to others. And so, I think that there are always moments for parents of kids with dyslexia where mom and dad have this serious conversation with one another and say, we absolutely have to do something about this because this is starting to impact the quality of life for this child. So he was struggling intensely with sight words. So another practice that kind of added to Frederick's feelings about himself was that in the school he was at, they drilled sight words. So for any of you that know about the science of reading, like there are only so many sight words, and drilling all words as sight words is an ineffective practice. But they not only did that for Frederick, but they timed him. And so that was yet another thing that he was failing at and unable to do successfully. So it just felt like, man, anything that I'm doing that has to do with language and reading is terrible, and I don't like it at all. Patricia said he couldn't decode any word in isolation. He couldn't read books independently at all. And so Patricia was trying to help him with sound by sound decoding without any success. And not surprisingly, Frederick began refusing to read altogether. So I think that that's common. It wasn't that he was having these major behavioral problems anywhere else. It's that he was being asked to do things over and over that his brain literally could not do. And so he got frustrated and he got angry and he just shut down. So he was refusing to do any kind of schoolwork. He was refusing to read. And despite that, Frederick was still fascinated with books. So, he would get out a book and look at the pictures and turn the pages. But in terms of him being able to read any of the text, it was quite literally impossible at the start of the program. Patricia said he couldn't hear rhymes and nursery rhymes either. So that is a common trait for kids with dyslexia, is they really, really struggle to rhyme because, again, you have to have some phonological memory in order to know which parts of the word would stay the same and which parts would change. Frederick could not do that. He struggled in music programs with timing and musical concepts. He had difficulty showing time and directional concepts. The sight word approach that he had in school was entirely insufficient. It was like trying to memorize random information. She said it was like memorizing license plates for Frederick. And so through this process, both Roger and Patricia realized how comprehensive reading really is and learning to read is in the brain. And they said, oh my gosh, like this just has so many implications in every area of his life that we really have to get this right. And at the same time, Frederick has incredible gifts. So as I was mentioning before, most kids with dyslexia have average or above average intelligence. So he is remarkable at being able to tell stories. He can deliver extended monologues about imaginary scenarios. He maintains detailed fictional narratives during hikes that he goes on with his family. He can answer questions about his imaginary worlds without hesitation. He's a gifted artist. He's got exceptional fine motor skills and spatial awareness, which, as we know, are traits of people with dyslexia, but he had this unexpected difficulty in language that was making life very, very challenging for him. So he goes through the program. He does the 10 to 15 minutes a day through all of the modules in Retrain the Dyslexic Brain. And within several months, Frederick was able to make massive, massive progress. And so, she said, while it took significant time in the beginning to really establish the foundations in his brain between letters and sounds, he has now firmly mastered these concepts. Before, he couldn't even delete a middle sound from a word, like moving from magnet. Now he's got that absolutely no problem. He's mastered skills in writing. She said his daily sessions were getting much easier, and Frederick's attitude was shifting. So this is super common that we see in a lot of clients, is once they realize that they actually can change their capacity through daily effort, they show up differently. And many of our clients are the ones who are asking their parents, like, hey, it's time for our session today. Do you want to go and work with me? Because they recognize that there is a connection and a correlation between the time that I spend and how my skills are improving. And so it was a fundamental shift in his self-concept and what he believed in himself, which I think is amazing. So Patricia had some goals for him as he started the program. She said, I really want him to be able to read to his little brother, because he had a desire to do that, but just couldn't. And so she was able to capture this photograph. Frederick was reading Cat in the Hat independently to his younger brother. He's super artistic and creates books all the time. And so now she said it's exciting that he's creating books with pictures and sentences now. And Roger said, gosh, one of the greatest moments is when he overheard Frederick saying to somebody else, I'm a reader. And so at that point, he knew that he had changed his own view of himself. Now, when he sees words in his environment, he'll say, oh, what's that? What does this mean? Oh, that says this. He'll include a lot more words in his drawings. He writes stories, loves drawing pictures, and will now write the words around them to give context. He's very much into engineering, and it's super exciting to see that now all of that is, she said.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Now all of that is possible. And Roger said it's something that we've taken for granted, that reading is a process that can be very difficult. And when you realize, like, whoa, this is actually a very complicated process within the brain, it's not just reading, it impacts so many aspects of their life. So now that Frederick is actually able to do this, his brain has connected letters and sounds. He is able to read on his own. He is able to write on his own. It's absolutely phenomenal to see how that impacts every area of his life. Patricia spoke specifically of the support that she got throughout the program. She said the support of others in our coaching group who were talking about their own child's difficulties, their own child's successes, the strategies, was invaluable. She said the coaches are there making sure that you're doing it right, helping you to gain confidence. All of that support is really very helpful. You are not in it alone. So just an absolute joy to be able to talk about Frederick and some of the ways that the program really helped him to shift his life. So let's take a look at the data, and I'll help you to understand why this is so significant. So as we mentioned at the top of our call, here's a summary of his data, and we'll go through that a little bit more right now. So this phonological awareness assessment is really pivotal. So when we read, we have to have the ability in our brain to be able to hear all of the sounds in a word and be able to manipulate those. So if I said the word Germany and I asked you to take ma out and tell me what's left, your brain has to know that Germany has 3 syllables, that ma is the middle syllable, that jur and me are left, and when I put those together, it makes journey. That mental process for a child with dyslexia is almost impossible. And for Frederick, this was really difficult. He had 28 errors on that initial assessment at only 33% accurate. When he was done, wow, that is a typo. He should not have had 39,000. His score at the end was 35 out of 42 with 7 errors at 83% accurate. So just massively different in how his brain was able to connect letters and sounds. So because he's still young and little, he's going to continue growing in that. This is likely at 100% by now, but it's absolutely huge in terms of how much he grew within the program. So now we're going to talk a little bit about educational statistics, and maybe you know a lot about statistics and maybe you don't, but I want to help you to see why this data is so pivotal and why it's really, really important to choose an intervention for your child that is going to close the gap. So what you see in front of you is called the normal distribution curve. And so it's how we typically see data. In the middle, where this red line is the 50th percentile or average. So over the last several decades, educational researchers have looked at how much growth is really typical in an entire school year. So John Hattie is one of the ones who really pioneered a lot of this research, but we know that a 0.3 of a standard deviation is typical. So when we look at these big lines here, these are standard deviations of change. So when we start first grade, for example, and when we end first grade, we can expect that the child will have a 0.3% of change or a standard deviation of change. So if we start fourth grade and we end fourth grade, we know that this amount of growth is typical over an entire school year. So what you need if you are working with a child with dyslexia is an intervention that is going to have more growth than what is typical for the year because you need to close the gap. So this green line right here is what is considered moderate statistical significance. This is a 0.5. We go from being here to half a standard deviation of change different. And this one, this orange one right here, is what we would call statistically significant. This is a 0.8 of a standard deviation, almost a 1.0 to get all the way to the next standard deviation. But we know with statistical confidence that whatever intervention that we had a statistically significant change by doing that intervention. So this is kind of like the gold standard that we're looking for in data when we know that something actually worked in a very, very positive way. So when we look at Frederick's data on the wide range achievement test 5, he started at the 9th percentile. So if Frederick would have made the typical growth that an average kid would have made in an entire school year, it would have put him right here at this yellow dot. If Frederick would have made statistically significant progress, meaning we know with confidence that this intervention had a statistically significant impact on his growth in reading, he would have made it right to this brown dot. But Frederick made 2 standard deviations of growth and was at the 61st percentile by the time he finished our program. So when we talk about closing the gap, we know with absolute statistical confidence, ×2, like we tripled his expected growth here by doing what we know neurologically his brain needed. We got straight to the root cause, which was the fact that his brain could not connect letters and sounds together. We taught it how to do that, and it had a massive statistical impact on his reading performance. And so we'll look at the same thing in spelling. So when he started, he was at the 12th percentile. If he would have grown the typical amount that any kid would have grown in an entire school year, Frederick would have been at this yellow dot. If he would have made statistically significant progress, meaning we know with confidence that this intervention had a positive impact on his spelling performance, he would have been at this brown dot. But again, Frederick went 1.5 standard deviations above his initial performance, blew those scores out of the water, made a huge leap in his progress, closing the gap between where he is and his peers. And you'll look, he was above average for his peers in reading and exactly at average for his peers in spelling. So when we talk about early intervention and why we want to intervene early, it's because we have the capacity to make it all the way up to where our peers are. In addition, Frederick had an additional 7 items that were spelled phonetically correctly. These were really difficult words like cacophony and malfeasance, where he was able to get to the 80th percentile with his good phonetic equivalent. So just absolutely amazing, massive growth. We're so proud of him. So what we want to also honor and appreciate is that Patricia was a vital piece in this puzzle. So we do not wave a magic wand over kids and say like, woo, your brain is able to do these things. This 100% happened because Patricia took our coaching. She maintained daily consistency with the program. She was diligent with her practice and support of Frederick. She leaned into our coaching in both strategy and mindset support. Despite Frederick's resistance, she was committed to providing a warm, loving environment for her son to thrive. And always, she continued to believe in the incredible gifts of her son and all that was possible for him. So I just want to celebrate her in this process because this data would not exist if it were not for her connecting with our program and our coaching. So great job, Patricia. We're super proud of you. And one quote that she left for all of you is to trust the process. It does seem a little strange sometimes that the exercises that we're doing actually do have an effect, but it does. It really does. She said, trust the science. So one thing that we do want to really celebrate is that this is typical growth. We know through collecting all of the data from clients that this kind of exponential growth is typical of our graduates. So as I mentioned before, this 0.3 is what we would expect in an entire school year. This 0.8 is what we know is statistically significant. Our average graduate is making a 1.7 standard deviations leap from where they started. So it's just an absolutely massive data-driven program that we have seen such incredible results from. But it does take work. Like it is absolutely due to the consistency and repetition that the parents are implementing at home with our support. So if you want to dig more into the standard deviations, I've got a citation down here at the bottom so that you can learn more about like what are the effects on student achievement, but just something that we're proud of. Frederick's standard deviations were 2.5, 2.0. A lot of the top interventions that we know for students are like a 0.7, a 0.9, a 1.3. So we're blowing those out of the water and we're super proud of that. So again, I want to leave you with like why this is so important, and we are critical advocates for kids. Why is it critical for you as a parent to close the gap in your child's performance? It's because they miss opportunities. So whether that means that they can't go to recess because they have to stay behind and do reading intervention support, or they miss out on something that's happening in class because they're getting pulled into a small group, or they can't take an elective because they have to instead take a reading support class, or they don't go for a job that they might really have wanted to do because they feel like they're incapable or they could never do that because of these struggles. But inevitably, there is missed opportunity when this gap doesn't get closed. There are current and ongoing struggles. There are future opportunities that they miss, and it impacts everybody. So it is not just the child with dyslexia that gets impacted. It is 100% the family dynamic and the unit that is surrounding that. So if you are mom and you are having to take that folder out of the backpack nightly and they are melting down and in tears and under the table and throwing a tantrum or whatever the case may be, that is stressful. That is hard, and that is something that you absolutely need to shift so that there is peace in your home. It can impact the dynamic between siblings. It is very common that sometimes younger siblings outperform their older ones with dyslexia, and that is hard. So there is just, inevitable suffering that happens in the entire family unit as a result of having these struggles. So when you can shift that, when you can reorganize how the brain connects letters and sounds, you can improve academic performance. You can increase self-esteem and confidence. You get better mental health overall for you and your kiddo. There are greater access points to opportunities, future and current. So I just want to let you know that if that is you and you're out there and saying like, okay, I think there is something definitely wrong. I have this intuition in my heart and in my gut that something's going on, but I don't yet know what it is. I want to invite you to be a part of our Dyslexia Discovery Workshop. We do these regularly. And it's really to help give you the tools and the assessments right inside of your home. So it's going to take you about 20 minutes to administer 3 different assessments to really figure out, is that what you're dealing with? And if it is, then you've now got the tools in your pocket to say, great, now I know what we need to work on and we can make a plan from there. So if that's you, just comment or send us an email at support@retrainthedyslexicbrain.com and we'll get you connected with our Dyslexia Discovery Workshop so that you can figure those things out. And if you are a parent who is like, okay, I know that this is the kind of thing that we're dealing with. I know we need to make statistically significant progress. Ask yourself, am I somebody that's going to show up to do the work? Could I be like Patricia? Am I willing to get coaching on how to spend 10 to 15 minutes a day with my child so that we can massively shift their brain's relationship with letters and sounds so that we can be in an entirely different place within 16 weeks? So if that's you, I would invite you to have a complimentary call with our team. So this is really an opportunity for you to apply to work with us, for us to figure out what exactly is going on with your child, if this is someone that we can help, and if it is, do you meet the criteria of the kind of client that we're looking to work with? Because we know that you have to be committed, you have to be coachable, you have to be resourceful. If you're those things, we can definitely help you. So please reach out. You can either comment in the chat, you can send us a message at support@retrainthedyslexicbrain.com, and we'll be happy to set you up with one of those complimentary calls to see if this is the right fit for you.